Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2. Vérification en français aussi.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. Before we start, I'd like to note that simultaneous interpretation will be provided for item 3 on the agenda, and committee members and members of the public are reminded to use their earphones as necessary. And for members of the public, we have translation devices and earphones located in the box on the front table. Alors, en français, un service d'interprétation simultanée sera offert pour l'article 3 de l'ordre du jour d'aujourd'hui. Nous rappelons aux membres du comité de porter leur écouteur au besoin, tandis que les membres du public sont invités à utiliser les appareils de traduction et les écouteurs se trouvent dans la boîte sur la table située près de la porte juste là. Okay, so moving on to the agenda, in terms of regrets, Vice Chair Podolsky has informed us that he is not able to attend the meeting. Declarations of interest, any? I see none. Confirmation of minutes from our meeting of 11th February 2016, are those carried? Carried. Just to note on the agenda that we have a cultural heritage impact statement which was circulated for 135 Barrett Street. We're actually going to talk briefly about that item. We're going to get an update from staff later in the agenda, but I did want to point out that under the new procedures which we approved last year, we want to make sure that committee members are aware of CHIS's, cultural heritage impact statements, as they occur. I'd like to try and go through the agenda to see what we can pass on consent, and then we'll come back to the items on which either there's an anticipated presentation or members of the public have signed up to speak. So we'll begin with item 1, which is an application for the demolition of a garage and the construction of a new one at 16 Sweetland Avenue. Can we carry that, or did members of the committee have comments? No? Is that item carried? Carried. Great. Item 2 is an application for new construction at 140 Howard Street. Members of the committee will recall we had approved a design for a previous house. Then there unfortunately had been a fire on the property. Property was sold. The new owners have come back with plans to build a house on that site. No comments from the public. That was approved also by the Heritage Committee of the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association. Can we carry that item? Carried. Wonderful. Item number 3, which is the designation of the former Adath Jeshurun Synagogue. We're going to hold that because staff are going to tell us a little bit about that designation recommendation. Item 4, which is the designation of Kilmorey, 21 Withrow Avenue. We're going to hold that item too because members of the public would like to speak to us about that. Item 5, which is an application to alter the Hungarian embassy, is a case where there had been a previous application which had expired. This is an application to alter the sunroom portion of the building. This had been approved in the previous term of council. Is that carried? Carried. Great. Item 6 is alterations of the building at 302 Waverley Street, which is in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. No members of the public are signed up on that item. Can we carry that item, or? Okay, so the question had been landscaping, but Councillor McKenney said we're okay with that. We're dealing with that separately, so that item is carried. Item 7 is a list of heritage permits issued through delegated authority in 2015. Members will recall that we established this procedure at our retreat last spring and passed it, I think, in July, in order just so that we are aware of permits that are issued through delegated authority. There is a list located in the agenda. I want to thank staff for producing that. Any questions or comments on that, or can we carry that? Yeah, agreed. Yeah, very useful. So that is carried. Thank you, staff. We're going to hold item 8, which is Heritage Register procedures, just so that staff can briefly outline what those procedures are. I think it's straightforward, but I think it's important for committee members to just to hear from staff on that. Item 9, status update on inquiries or motions. Can we carry that? Carried. Wonderful. And then we'll have a couple of brief items under technical circulations to discuss, but we'll get to that later. So, all that brings us back to the agenda, and we're going to start with item 3, which is a designation recommendation from staff. So I will ask Anne Fitzpatrick if she can give us a short presentation on this item. Over to you. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for that. In front of you today is a recommendation for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act of the former Adath Yeshurun Synagogue located at 375 King Edward Avenue. Okay, we're okay. The property is located on the east side of King Edward Avenue, north of the intersection of King Edward and Rideau. Here's an aerial view of the property. It's located in Lower Town. To the south, there's a high-rise building to the south that you can see here, and several historic buildings, including the hydroelectric station and the Champagne Baths to the north. Here's a view looking south and north up King Edward Avenue. You can see the synagogue there on the left in the top picture and on the right on the bottom picture. Here's 2 photos of the building. It's a 3-story red brick structure constructed in 1904 in the Romanesque Revival style. The building served the Adath Yeshurun congregation, which was Ottawa's first Jewish congregation, until 1956, when it was converted to the Jewish Memorial Community Chapel in 1957. It functioned as a site as Jewish funerals until 1997, and today the synagogue serves as a church for the French congregation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Canada. The photo on the left is from pre-1929, when problems with the leaky roof resulted in them adding a gable roof and the decorative parapet that we see today. Some of the applicable policies, the city's official plan states that individual buildings will be designated as properties of cultural heritage value, and the provincial policy statement states that significant built heritage resources shall be conserved. Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act gives municipalities the ability to designate properties of cultural heritage value. In order to be designated, they must meet Regulation 0906, which will indicate the property will have design, associative, or contextual value. For design value, the property is a great example of the Romanesque Revival style and early synagogue architecture. It's the oldest remaining synagogue in Ottawa. Its architectural features include the round arch entranceway, the elaborate round arch windows, the 2 tower-like projecting end bays topped with Moorish-inspired decorative metal domes. It's one of only 2 synagogues in Canada to have that feature. The historical and associative value is that it was created to accommodate the Jewish community in Lower Town, which had outgrown its earlier synagogue, which had been on Murray Street. And it was designed by notable architect John W.H. Watts, with alterations by Alan Horwood and Cecil Burgess. The contextual value are that it complements the remaining historic buildings on King Edward Avenue. It's, as mentioned, the Champagne Baths and the hydroelectric station. It's a unique architectural style that makes it a visual and historic landmark for the community. You can see it stands out against the high-rise to the south. In terms of consultation for the property owner, the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Canada, is aware of the proposed designation. In conversations with the pastor at the church, they've indicated that they are not in support of the designation, as they're nervous in terms of the impact on potential development, but I believe the owner and their representative are here today. Councillor Fleury supports the designation of the building. Heritage Ottawa also supports the designation, and the Lower Town Community Association supports the designation and has provided comments in the staff report. In conclusion, the Adath Yeshurun Synagogue meets all 3 criteria under Ontario Regulation 0906, and the Department recommends issuance of a Notice of Intention to Designate under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, according to the Statement of Heritage Character attached as Document 5.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. We do have one member of the public who signed up to speak on this item. Alors, Marcus Le Tourneau, qui représente l'Église adventiste du 7e jour francophone d'Ottawa.
Bonjour et bienvenue au comité. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. As mentioned, my name is Mark Letourneau. I'm here from Letourneau Heritage Consulting with my colleague Chris Uchiyama on behalf of the Église Adventiste du Septembre Juif Francophone d'Ottawa. We're here to cover a couple of different points. We first wanted to thank everyone for allowing us the opportunity to speak. We wanted to start off by saying we actually are at the point where we are not going to object to the designation. However, we do have some points of concern, clarification, and some questions that we would like to ask of the committee. And we do have some, what we hope are friendly amendments to the proposed designation bylaw. One of the key things that we wanted to highlight is that this is an active community with over 500 members. They do have specific needs, and the key focus of their activities is on their pastoral mission, which often may require alterations and changes to the structure. And the community is concerned whether or not the designation will affect that ability. Now, we've had the opportunity to talk with staff, and we actually really appreciated the opportunity to talk with staff. And the sense is no, the intent is not to have a negative effect on the pastoral mission, nor even to stop an appropriate adaptive reuse or redevelopment of the site. But in speaking with the community, this is one of the concerns, and they would like, if possible, some sort of statement indicating that the intent is not to do that. The other question, that issue that we did want to raise is the community has had the opportunity to look at the foundation, and there are structural issues with the foundation. And we wanted to highlight, because a couple of the attributes we will actually be suggesting be re-examined in the sense that there may have to be some pretty significant interventions to address the foundation issue. We also wanted to confirm that and state that at this time there is no plan for sale redevelopment, but the community wants to ensure that their opportunities in the future are as flexible as possible. And in terms of that, we do have a couple of clarifications within the bylaw. We've had an opportunity to review the draft bylaw, the opportunity to talk with staff. We would ask that the committee consider these as part of the revisions to the notice of intent to designate. The proposed wording refers to the building as both a 3-story and 2-story building. We would ask that that be clarified as a 2-story with basement. The statement 5 evenly spaced round arch stained glass windows on the front facade with stone sills, we are suggesting that it read cathedral glass instead of stained glass. They revised the description of the 2-story round arched window openings with a circular stained glass window and paired 1/1 windows with stone sills to identify that the round arched window openings, glazings, and sills of the circular window and the 2 paired 1/1 windows on each tower. The statement, the distinct string courses on the front facade perhaps should be revised to indicate there are 2, one on each at the first and second stories. We also would encourage that the statement of cultural heritage value, particularly the historical associative value, be revised to include the building's history as the Jewish Community Memorial Chapel, which was from 1957 to 1997, but also the fact that this is a home to an active community, and it has been home to that community since 1997. And then an additional small change that we recommend is, right now it refers to the architectural reasons for designation, and we would encourage a change to the actual wording of the act as physical design attributes, or values. The last 2 things that we wanted to raise within the proposed designation bylaw are 2 of the attributes. The first is the rectangular plan 2-story massing. We're wondering if it may be more appropriate to refer to the legibility of the structure as a 3-dimensional building as opposed to referring to the massing. Knowing, based off our conversations with staff, that there may be an opportunity for adaptive reuse, possibly an addition, possible redevelopment. And we feel the important thing is being able to see this not as a facade, but as actually a 3-dimensional structure, as opposed to saying rectangular plan 2-story massing. The other is the reference to the segmental arched window openings with stone sills on the east and west facades. The segmental arch windows are actually over the area where we do have concerns about the foundation. They've actually been refitted with a much smaller window, and there's been interior alterations, and a number of the windows have actually been altered. We would ask that the committee consider actually removing this attribute, or if it's included, with the understanding that some of these may have to be removed, may have to be altered at some point in the future. Lastly, there's a couple things that we did want to ask on behalf of the community. The community was curious who requested the designation. That information wasn't provided to them. But also whether or not there was funding to support any work on the heritage attributes of the property, if committee members were aware of any opportunities. Whether or not the city actually would support provisions in any proposed planning application. Things like, instead of cash in lieu of parkland, waiving that, possibly waiving development fees, looking at density bonusing, these sort of things that would actually encourage the adaptive reuse and retention of this sort of structure. Again, along with that, density bonusing, density rights transfers. And the last thing that we wanted to ask of the committee is if the committee and staff would be amenable to the community developing a conservation plan. One of the concerns of the community was having to come for approvals for every little thing, and in discussions with them, they are amenable to looking at a 5 to 10 year plan for some of their work, working with staff to define what is maintenance, and bringing something like that back to this committee so that they don't have to keep coming back for numerous approvals.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement. I let you go a little bit over because I recognize that you had a lot of issues to raise. Let me just make sort of a brief comment about some of the issues you raised, and then I'll ask staff. Although you don't technically have a right to ask questions, you've raised some interesting points which I will ask staff to clarify. With regard to the process for making alteration or changes to the building if council does indeed designate it. But I did want to comment briefly in terms of issues relating to document 5, which is the statement on the attributions of this. If there are, we don't really allow editorial changes to that. What's before the committee is actually the designation. And so if there are factual inaccuracies in the report, I certainly invite you to speak to staff offline about that. I'm sure staff would be amenable to changing things which are factually incorrect. But what's before this committee right now is the designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So we won't be able to get into the wording changes and wording issues. That's something that I encourage you to take up with staff. But I do think it would be helpful for staff to explain to you very briefly what the process is. It's important for you to understand that designation does not mean that you cannot apply at a later stage to make changes or alterations. Staff, could you please just describe very briefly to Mr. Le Tourneau what that process is? Thank you.
So in a property like this in the city of Ottawa, when there is an application made, we have two ways of approving applications: through delegated authority, wherein the owner of the building for a certain class of minor alterations would apply and be approved within 10 days through the delegated authority process within PGM. And then the process under the Ontario Heritage Act is, if there are major changes to that affect the heritage attributes, we would consider those and deal with them accordingly based on application received. If there was, Mr. Le Tourneau mentions bonusing, etc. Obviously, if there was an application for redevelopment, that would go through the land use planning process, and any parts of transfer of density, etc., would be dealt with at that stage.
Thank you. Mr. Le Tourneau, you had also asked about the designation origin. The report states that the city received a request to designate from the Lower Town Community Association, so I hope that answers your question. Do other committee members have any questions of Mr. Le Tourneau? Member Smollett?
Thank you. First of all, I want to really thank you for coming forward supporting the designation, because it's not often we get a building that screams heritage like this one does. This is really so important, just aside from the fact it's a beautiful building. It's interesting to read some of the letters about people in the community for whom this has been such a landmark in the community. So I really am happy that you're not opposing the designation. A couple of comments. One was certainly as a committee member, I would support TDRs, transfer development rights, and that sort of thing, and hope that you will pursue that with staff, because certainly when we want to save a building, we have to look at a way of also providing incentives to the owner to do that. So I would certainly encourage you to follow up on that if that became the case. One other thing was just, you mentioned about the foundation, and I see it's a beautiful cut limestone foundation. So I don't think it affects what we're discussing today, but I would suggest that you have someone who is a qualified restoration expert have a look at the foundation. That is a foundation that I would certainly want to see preserved, and as the owner of many buildings with cut limestone foundations like that, they can be maintained. Sometimes you may think it's worse than it is, and it may be a simple matter of some repointing and some repairs. So I would certainly encourage you to do that as well. Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker? Seeing none, one last point to mention is that you may again want to speak offline with staff who can tell you a little bit about the Heritage Grant Program that's operating in the City of Ottawa. So I'll let the staff follow up with you on that item. Thank you very much for coming out this morning. Appreciate the effort and the detail through which you've read the report and the supporting documents. Much appreciated. Okay, so that is the only public delegation signed up on this item. Do members have any questions of staff on the proposed report? Member Quinn?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the interior of the building. Is there any, was that considered? Were there any elements of the interior that were considered as potentially worthy of designation?
We didn't have access to the interior of the building, so it's described in the survey form, but we're not proposing any elements for designation.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions of staff? I don't sense a huge issue with the staff recommendations, so is that item carried? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we are moving on then to item 4 on our agenda, which is the designation of Kilmorey, 21 Withrow Avenue, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So we're going to start with a presentation from staff. We have a number of members of the public who are signed up on this item. I would also just like to mention that we will have a brief technical amendment on this item. Staff have asked that a small amendment to the report be made to better describe a portion of, I believe it's of the masonry. It's a small change, and we'll deal with that technical amendment later, but I just did want members of the public to be aware of that. So with that introduction, Ms. Collins, over to you, please.
Sorry for the delay. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of committee. This is the designation of Kilmorey at 21 Withrow Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Just to give you an idea of the location, the property is located in former Nepean, just west of Merivale Road, just off of Withrow Avenue. As you can see from this photo, or this map, sorry, it's quite a large property as it currently sits. This aerial photo, although it's a bit bright in here, it's difficult to see. The house dates from the 1840s, so it doesn't fit on the grid with everything else, and has a very large property associated with it. Just to give you an idea, this is the view from the street. So as I said, it's quite far back from the street, and it isn't very easy to see. It's located back here. Oh no, sorry. Sorry, there's a mistake in my slides. I'm going to speak to the French slides because the English slides are out of order for some reason. Sorry about that. The photo on the left-hand screen, on the right-hand screen, is a historic photo of the building showing it from 1910. The building used to have a front veranda associated with it, which has since been changed. Next slide. Keep going. This is the front facade of the building. It is a 1.5-story building with a central gable with a fan light in the front window. You can see, sorry, back one. With a fan light in the front window right here. The building was constructed in the between circa 1840 to 1850 for William Scott, who was one of the early pioneers in this area. The front facade, and you'll see this through the technical amendment that's been proposed, is constructed of dressed limestone laid in regular courses, and the rear and side facades are of rough-cut limestone laid in random courses. This is the side facade, so there have been a couple of additions to the building, as you can see here and here, and those additions have been excluded from the building. This is the north facade of the building. You can see here the rough-cut limestone construction laid more randomly than it is on the front facade. This is the rear of the building. There is a large garage that is excluded. It is not attached to the building. And again, here you can see some of the decorative details that have been included, segmental arches over the windows with voussoirs, sorry, not segmental arches, voussoirs over the windows and stone sills. As I mentioned at the beginning, the main decorative feature on this building, which is quite common from buildings built in the classical tradition in the mid-19th century, is this tripartite window with a decorative fan light above it with arched stonework and the stone lintel. We believe that the fan light at the top here is original to the building. And this is just another view as you approach the house from the street, so you can see here that it is oriented off-center. So the city's official plan, I won't go through this again as my colleague Anne has done this in the last presentation, but the city's official plan says that significant historic buildings will be designated under Part 4, and the provincial policy statement says that cultural heritage resources will be preserved. Ontario Regulation 0906 states that in order to be designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, a property must meet at least one of the following criteria, which are design value, historic value, and contextual value. For design value, as I said, this is a good example of a vernacular stone building constructed in the classical tradition in the early to mid-19th century. As you'll see in the Heritage Survey form, there are several examples of this type of building built throughout the Rideau Canal corridor, and were quite commonly built by early Irish and Scottish immigrants from locally quarried stone. It's constructed of limestone. It has a gable roof and symmetrical facade. Its historic or associative value comes from its association with the early development of the City View neighborhood, and even earlier than that, the early settlement of Nepean. As I said, constructed between 1840 and 1850 for William Scott, who emigrated from Ireland to Canada as a child in 1819. It is associated with Confederation poet William Wilfred Campbell, who wrote a poem about Kilmorey, which you'll see excerpted in the Heritage Survey form. His 1916 poem, Blood Drops of Heroes. He is the person who named the site Kilmorey. He did only live there for 4 years, but it is surmised that he always dreamed of having a country estate that reminded him of his ancestral home in Scotland, which is what this property became for him. In terms of consultation, the property owner is aware of the proposed designation, and I believe they are here today. Councillor Chiarelli is in support of the designation, and his comments are included in the staff report. Heritage Ottawa also supports the designation, and members of the local community have been involved in and contributed to the research on this property. So in conclusion, Kilmore meets 2 of the 3 criteria of Ontario Regulation 0906, and the Department recommends the issuance of a Notice of Intention to designate under Part 4 of the Act according to the Statement of Heritage Character attached as Document 5. And please accept my apologies for the mix-up in the slides.
Thank you very much. We have a number of members of the public who are signed up to speak. So maybe we'll go through that list, and then we'll give committee members an opportunity to ask questions or to comment on the recommendation. So we have 8 speakers signed up thus far. The first speaker on the list is Margie Howsam. Good morning and welcome to the committee. And just so that all speakers know, if it's your first time speaking at a council committee, the microphone is here, and we allot 5 minutes for public statements, and then we'll give members of the committee an opportunity to ask questions of you.
Chair Nussbaum, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Margie Howsam, and I am one of the 3 current owners of the property. From a sentimental perspective, we, the 3 current owners and children of the previous owner who loved his house and his city, can sympathize with the idea of keeping our family home intact and in use. However, we feel that a political drive to control other people's private land disposition is unfair value expropriation and an unsavory precedent that leads to significant penalizing of any owner's ability to sell their property in good faith. It also imposes an unrealistic expectation that old building heritage maintenance can continue indefinitely, either forced on owners or out of Ottawa's municipal taxes. Now, about the history and the famous occupants. Poet Wilfred Campbell lived in that location for 3 years only, from 1915 to 1918. There is nothing about the house that recognizes him. He spent more than 15 years in Wiarton, Ontario, for example. And from what we can ascertain, Wiarton has instead chosen as its claim to fame Willie Wiarton, the Albino Groundhog Day Festival. About the naming of 21 Withrow. The report continually uses the name Kilmore to refer to the house and references a Campbell poem with that name in it. We feel that this is romantically prejudicial, since only the poet really used it before this heritage initiative. Campbell was there for only 3 years, and our dad for 65, probably the longest owner ever. If it must have a name for heritage purposes, we feel it should be named the Dr. J. David Roger House. And about the architectural interest. This is not really an unusual example in the area, nor a landmark. It does not have fine architectural detail nor craftsmanship, nor does it support the character of the area. It's not even rare. Within walking distance, there are 2 other examples, and I have photos of them here. 41 Beaver Ridge and 2 Peter Street. There are other examples in the Ottawa landscape. How many examples are needed to keep the heritage and add to taxpayers' load? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to see if there are any questions of committee members. I see none. So, you're going to keep this as part of the 5 minutes, is it? Okay. Sure.
This is the second 5 minutes.
Okay.
She's second on the list.
Off you go. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm Jean Roger, the second daughter of Dr. J. David Roger. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'd just like to continue on the impact of the intent of heritage designation and issues going forward. So I'm just basically a continuation. Simply the intent of designation has penalized the value and sale of private property. On announcement of the intention, the owners lost a firm bid for the asking price. The revised submission lowered by considerably more than $500,000. It discouraged interest due to uncertain status, and also concern over approval requirements and approval process delays for any contemplated renovations impacting the building exterior. At the time, we also lost a favorite individual owner who wanted it for the land and the state during the controversy, and that was one that we wanted. The initiative has penalized the owners by triggering substantial ongoing support costs to the estate. Current costs for taxes, utilities, insurance, and required services are about $3,570 a month, besides non-monetary obligations to regularly visit and monitor for the mail and secure conditions. As well, there may be other repair incidentals, cleaning, and any legal fees both the city and the owners should there be escalating needs to address particular safeguards or interests. The issues going forward, the building should be maintained. It's expected that any new owner would want to modernize or personalize it to suit their needs without bureaucratic encumbrance or undue material or construction limitations. The current owners wish to sell it and the property for fair market value. Heritage issues are driving that value considerably less fair. If the property can't be sold reasonably, will the city, our taxes, pay for heritage maintenance and upkeep, or will it be sadly left to sit and rot as an opportunity for vandals? It is very disturbing that the city can make decisions on private property but then leaves the ensuing additional responsibilities and expenses to owners or taxpayers. While we understand and laud the interest of Heritage Ottawa, the current owners seriously question whether the fundamental public driving force is really heritage value, or rather is a grasping of whatever means possible to retain status quo of existing green space, albeit somebody else's property, versus practical densification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those two interventions. I'll just see if there are any questions from committee members. Yeah, Councillor Wilkinson.
When you talk about practical densification, what exactly do you mean?
Our intent was never to load it with townhouses or to make it an uncomfortable green space. We were trying to take a responsible community view to how it might be developed furtherly.
That doesn't mean you have
single-family home.
But the house could be a part of that, could it not?
It could.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
I see no other questions, so thank you very much for coming out. Maybe I'll just ask staff, because I suspect this issue of the property versus the house is going to come up as it just did. Am I correct in saying the staff recommendation is designation of the house only? Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. Staff are recommending only the inclusion of the house and not the property.
And the question is exterior only?
Yes, only the exterior of the house.
Okay, thank you. So next on the list is Ben Glossop from the Poets Pathway. And following Mr. Glossop, we have Nancy Wilson and John Lyons. Good morning and welcome.
Hi, I'm here to read an address by Jane Moore, who is our president of the Poets Pathway. Good morning, and thank you for this short time to explain Campbell and Kilmorey importance of Campbell and Kilmorey to the Poets Pathway. William Wilfred Campbell is one of our 5 national poets, the Confederation poets. These poets are said to have actually initiated Canadian literature. Our monument, which consists of poems along the 34-kilometer green space, is a national monument to Canadian poets and to Canada itself, and is surely the largest monument of this type. Our poets were of immense significance to Canada and were nation builders themselves. As they celebrated this land, they were published not only in Canada, but also in the U.S. and in Britain. In fact, Campbell was lionized in Britain. Their work, their very existence, matters to us all. Campbell's involvement in Ottawa began when he arrived in 1891 as a successful poet, expecting to find employment because Sir John A. was hiring poets. MacDonald's goal was to make Ottawa the cultural capital of Canada, and Campbell worked for the government, mostly in the militia department and the archives. He became friends with Duncan Campbell Scott and Archibald Lampman, and all three lived in Ottawa until their deaths. The three wrote a lively weekly literary column in the Globe for a year and a half. They lived, worked, and socialized in Ottawa, where they joined the Royal Society and the Scientific Society and helped create the fabric of the city. They played on the land, walking, canoeing, camping, and learning and loving all that land. They wrote about Canada's churches and bells, rivers and woods, skies, wildflowers, and people. Campbell himself lived in many homes in Ottawa, including a cottage on the Rideau, and rented homes on O'Connor Street, Bronson Street, and Charles Street, and participated in sparkling literary soirees at the home of French auteur Achille Frechette in New Edinburgh. Campbell described in a column the home that he would like to own, and in 1915 he was able to buy his first home, a grey farmhouse 3 miles outside of Ottawa, and he named it Kilmorey. He gloried in its 5.5 acres, and he worked the land hard, and he wrote in its wood-paneled study. And at this time he was surely very concerned about the Great War, which had begun a few months earlier, and he made it his duty to seek out, inspire, and help train men and youth as militia in City View and to help Britain win the war. Campbell wrote prolifically essays, novels, plays, articles, and poems of all types, but above all, poetry of the land, about the woods, the snow, the Ottawa and Rideau rivers. Out of the northern waste you wash your thunder and sweep. And he wrote about Kilmorey, when the woods at Kilmorey are scarlet and gold, and the vines are like blood on the wall. He also wrote many poems about citizens. One was to Henry Harper, best friend to a young William Lyon Mackenzie King. Harper drowned bravely trying to save Bessie Blair from drowning in the icy Ottawa River during a skating party at the Governor General's. William Lyon Mackenzie King, later Prime Minister, became Campbell's best friend and himself raised the money for Campbell's memorial, a bench, and a bronze plaque in Beechwood Cemetery. The Poets' Pathway has erected 3 plaques to Campbell. He wrote Down the Merivale Road after moving to Kilmorey, and we placed that poem on a bronze plaque and a boulder out beside a pond on Colonnade Road. You'll see a picture I provided. Close to Kilmorey to mark his home. The day of the unveiling, November 8th, 2011, CBC Radio held a competition to see who could write the best Merivale Road poem today. We also placed Campbell's A Wood lyric at the entrance to Coronation Park Woods. Those words, "Into the stilly woods I go," mark so much of what we want to say with our pathway, homage to nature, to earth, to Canada, and to the still places within the heart. We placed the 3rd Campbell poem last year at the entrance to Mackay Lake at Rockcliffe Park. Canadian students for decades memorized the famous lines of Campbell's iconic Indian Summer. Along the lines of smoky hills, the crimson forest stands, and all the day the blue jay calls throughout the autumn lands. When Campbell died in 1918, neighbors and friends in City View wrote poems telling how he had enlarged their lives. They predicted that now the song is hushed, the singer strangely still. The years would reveal Campbell as singer and prophet, patriot and man. Since 2010, our work on the Poets' Pathway has been supported with grants each year from the Ottawa's Heritage Department, and we have erected 12 beautiful and meaningful monuments across the city so far. Number 13 is on the way, and the monument completing our own work of art, this outdoor tribute to Ottawa, her lands, and her poets, will go up outside the city archives in 2017. Campbell's daughter, Faye Malloch, wrote this of her dad and Kilmorey. They worked very hard at Kilmorey. He was very happy there, and he and my mother were enthusiastic. This was the first home that really belonged to them, and they were full of plans. My father had always felt that he must settle on a spot of his own where he would feel that he really belonged. Campbell died unexpectedly of pneumonia on New Year's Day after going outside on New Year's Eve and breathing in the cold night air on his porch at Kilmorey, looking at his beloved.
Sorry, this is actually fascinating, and I am enjoying your presentation, but out of fairness, your time is wrapping up. Do you want to say anything before you finish? A final sentence or two?
Just that, it strikes me going to the Mackenzie King estate in Rideau, Gatineau Park, thank you, that a lot of the same things resonate with what he was trying to do there and what has been written about this particular house. Phil Jenkins of the Ottawa Citizen recently wrote an article saying that this would be a wonderful place to have as a poet's retreat. There are 4 such retreats in Canada already, and this, considering that W.W. Campbell is one of, if not Canada's greatest poet, maybe outside Archibald Lampman, historically, this would be, a really fitting thought to put forward.
Thank you. Okay, great. Are there any questions at all for Mr. Glossop? Seeing none, I thank you for coming out. And maybe just a quick note for people in the audience who are wondering about the process that we're engaged in now, because this is important. Issues often come up under designation requests about affordability and other issues. We're really charged right now with evaluating a staff recommendation to designate a property under Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The legislation says that we may designate if one of 3 criteria are satisfied. They are design or physical value, as staff has said, historical or associative value, which I think is what Mr. Glossop was speaking to, and contextual value. And it's our job to make a decision as to whether we agree with staff that the property in question satisfies one or more of these 3 criteria. So I just wanted to set that out because I agree that the history portion that Mr. Glossop spoke of is actually relevant to this question, as were the items raised earlier by Ms. Howsam. But the issues of cost and issues of that relate outside of those 3 criteria are not really part of the decision-making process at this moment. There is always an opportunity for a property owner of a designated property to come back to council and alter a property, to demolish a property, but it is important to state that what's under consideration right now is the evaluation of these 3 criteria under the Ontario Heritage Act. So I wanted to clarify, and we'll move to our next speaker, which is Nancy Wilson and John Lyons, who I believe are coming up together. Councillor Torelli, it was fascinating to hear that there was a poetry competition for Merivale Road. I wasn't aware of that. That's amazing. Good morning.
At least it wasn't Bell's Corners.
Good morning and welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Nancy Wilson, Knee Parks. I was born and grew up in Cityview on Rossland Avenue, 1 block away from 21 Withrow Avenue. Today, as an adult, I live at 16 Withrow, just across from the Roger property. As a little girl in the 50s and early 60s, I used to walk with my friends over to the Rogers Woods to play. On our trek there, we would walk the wall, balancing as kids do, getting from one end to the other. It was a game. It was our pastime. This week, the owner destroyed the front part of the beautiful old stone wall. And there's some pictures here of the wall as it was and as it is now. Today I sit at my home and watch birds and other wildlife flit between the trees on the property at 21 Withrow and my feeders. What a delight when you think I live 1 block away from the busy Merivale Road. That property at 21 Withrow is a landmark in our neighborhood, one that has been there before Canada began. It has an outstanding historical significance, and it is what is left of Cityview's beginnings. In Canada's north, Inukshuk is considered a landmark, so an old, dry, stacked stone wall would definitely be a landmark here in our community. When looking at the recommendations for property designation at the former Ablates property at 175 Main Street, the trees were a big consideration when deciding whether to include the property with the building. So surely the old mature trees at 21 Withrow Avenue would also be included in this consideration. It should also be noted that the owner has started to clear these old trees from the property. A prominent poet once lived at 21 Withrow and wrote about his life at this property. He bought a 5 and a bit acres with a stone house as his paradise, his getaway from his government job in the city. He called it Kilmorey, a property with its original stone wall as referenced by the Historical Society of Ottawa and Jane Moore of the Poets Walk. And I have those references here. It is a place he could enjoy the trees, his gardens, and bring up his family. He could relax and write his poetry, much of which was about the beauty and aesthetics of his property. William Campbell was friends with other famous national poets, Archibald Lampman and Duncan Campbell Scott, and part of a group of writers we now call the Confederate Poets. He was also a close friend of Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King. Unfortunately, Campbell died on New Year's morning in 1918, but he left behind a wealth of cultural heritage at his property on the Marable Road. Eventually, in the early 50s, the property was bought by another prominent person, Dr. J. David Roger. He was a well-known physician in the Ottawa area, and he lived in our community until his death last year. He and his wife brought up their family at 21 Withrow, and he cared for and loved the land and the trees in his gardens. This was his home, and he walked the neighborhood talking to us with pride until the last year of his life. Dr. Roger fought to protect the land at Beechwood Cemetery. I'm sure he would want his land protected too. This property at 21 Withrow Avenue is a part of my childhood. As the woods we played in, the wall we scaled and walked along, the Halloweens we walked the long driveway up the big stone to the big stone house. It was a neighborhood ritual, one I eventually enjoyed with my children and my grandchildren. As an adult, it continues to be part of my life. It is across the street from me. It is where Dr. Roger walked and chatted. It was something we passed every day. The beautiful property in the middle of our crazy world, seconds from busy Marable Road, is a sign of peace and tranquility right here in the middle of our hectic everyday life. It is a landmark. It is part of the fabric of this community. If the beautiful historic stone house is designated heritage, that would be wonderful. But if the house stands alone without its land, that makes the address unique, and this land is developed, what is lost? One, the address that we love, 21 Withrow, would no longer be. The house will lose its identity. Two, in the fall, the winter, the house can still be seen facing the Marable Road on which it was originally built. True to its identity, and as the poet Campbell wrote in his poem Down the Marable Road, the house as it sits now can still see Marable Road, the original farming corridor. Without the land, and once developed, this would be lost. Without the land, the trees, the gardens, the beauty that William Campbell wrote so passionately about would be lost. The poet wrote about his love for the land. He bought it because of the land, and although parts of the property were severed off, the remaining grounds would be lost, as would Campbell and Dr. Rogers' dream for its future. The feeling of peace and continuity from our past, our cultural heritage, would be lost forever. This continuity has crossed generations already, and the property that has been steadfast is a place where people can establish their location. This property is a piece of my heritage, as it is for many people, and I ask you to carefully consider the property along with the house for designation as you move forward. When I sit on my porch or look out of my window, I see beautiful mature trees, the old stone-stacked country wall, and a little piece of tranquil country in our fast-paced world. This property and the house predates us all. It has always been here. Please don't take this landmark and its identity away from the beautiful house. Please leave us this little piece of the past. Please leave the trees, the beauty, and the open space. Please leave what is under my sky constant.
Thank you very much for those comments. Any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Wilkinson?
The only way to save property like that is it has to be bought by government or something. We can't say because you enjoy a piece of property that people can't use their own property. So we'll save the house. But what happens, the property would be done later with Councillor Shirley and planning staff if they came in with something. And it's nice to have it. We all have things like that. But if they're not in public ownership, we can't force it on people.
So what is?
I understand where you're coming from. I was like that as a kid too.
Okay.
So what Councillor Wilkinson is saying is what's before the committee right now is designation of the house. I think you are arguing, as you are entitled to, that the designation ought to be expanded to the property. So appreciate that point of view, and thank you very much for coming out. Okay. So next on the list is Stuart Ginn, followed by Anya Mihailovich. So Mr. Ginn. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. My name is Stuart Ginn, and I live at 64 Cantor Boulevard, which is about 500 meters or so from the property in question. And it's a nice segue from Nancy's comments, because my view is that the property as well as the house should be part of the designation. The reason basically is that the property is the frame for the house as a picture, and just like the Mona Lisa would be worth far less if it was sitting in my basement in a file folder, this property itself would be worth far less if it were simply the house and not the property that goes along with it. In the same way that another analogy would be a diamond ring. If you take the diamond out of the ring, if the diamond's still beautiful, but you can't show it off, you can't do anything with it, you can't display it. And the property here is as much part of the heritage designation as the house itself is. I also had one factual anomaly that I noted in the document, so it was just a question of who would I address that question to. Factual inaccuracy.
So if you have a comment on the document related to the report, and you see factual inaccuracy, you can raise it with staff offline.
Okay.
Are you finished with your statement?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just want to see if there are any questions from committee members. I don't see any, so thank you very much for coming out and expressing your view.
Thank you.
So next on the list is Anya Mihailovich. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Anya Mihailovich. I live in the other Heritage Stone Home in City View. These homes were built to last and will stand longer than any recently built ones. It is essential that we protect and designate 21 Withrow and its grounds with heritage designation. A stone farmhouse needs to be thank you. A stone farmhouse needs room to be. It was the intent when originally built, and to take away the land that surrounds it would be taking away its identity. Its identity within our neighborhood would forever be lost. It would sit on a small parcel of land, drowned out by the new homes. At some point, the city must put value and importance to the few lucky heritage homes that still have some land remaining within the city. Why is densification given more value than historic preservation? 21 Withrow has not only just over 2 acres, but many features that for a long time in our area created a landmark to its identity. From the mature trees surrounding the property, its dry stacked stone fence along 2 sides, and its estate-like presence, the long winding laneway from the street surrounded by nature, these features are unique to this property and should be preserved. The city has, over the last 100 years, allowed this home to become what it is today. Every permit issued, severance granted, and variance allowed has all been approved and signed off on. Even the orientation of the home to its surrounding was planned and approved by the city. The irony is that these are the very reasons that the Heritage Group has not included the land with its recommendation for heritage designation. The city should take responsibility for its past decisions and not hold them against a property that is truly worth of designation. I recommend that the heritage designation be allocated both to the stone home and the entire grounds that remain. In my research, the property exhibits all the attributes required to be a landmark within our community and the City of Ottawa. I am disappointed by the process of designation this week. Our community felt helpless as the dry stacked stone wall was torn down. As our community tries to gain heritage designation, I feel that the property should remain in an as-is condition until a decision is made. The Heritage Group may want to establish such rules in the future to prevent destruction of notable landmarks. As Ottawa has many heritage stone masons, I feel rebuilding this wall is still possible, hopefully with the original stones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to see if there are any questions from committee members. I see none, so thank you very much for coming out this morning.
Thank you for your
So next on our list of speakers is Mihailo Mihailovich.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Obviously, I'm not going to repeat what my wife just talked about, but I want to go more into the technical aspects of what a landmark is. The Webster Dictionary calls a landmark an object as a stone or a tree that marks the boundary of a land. When we first moved into the neighborhood, as my wife mentioned, we owned 2 Peter Street, which is the other stone house, not far, about 5 streets over, that was built, ironically, by the same Archie Scott. The landmark, when we first came into this neighborhood, and we drove around, the first thing we saw was these massive trees surrounding this beautiful property. We didn't know about the stone house. We just saw this piece of land in the middle of this older neighborhood that just stood out from everything else. And to me, that stands as a landmark. And it wasn't until later when we drove by and really looked into the property, we saw a stone house very similar to ours, not knowing any history of it. We're thinking, oh wow, there's another stone house here. But the way the property was laid out, the trees around it, the stone fence, all you could think was, wow, this is like an estate property. This must have been owned by some aristocrats and everything else. Whereas our house, it's on a simple property, definitely not even close to as large. It's only a 1/4 acre. And a lot of people in the neighborhood, when we tell them where we live, it's the old stone house near the museum, near the church, they go, oh, I never really noticed that. It's a small property, it's not noticed. Even though it's exposed, it doesn't get noticed. But if you mention to locals 21 Withrow, they go, oh, I know all about that, especially some of the people that have been here for almost their whole lives. They say, yeah, we used to play there all the time, and they grew up around it. They remember the land when it was larger, before it got severed. It is the landmark of the community. So in the report, it does talk, is this a landmark? And it talks just being a large green space. Unfortunately, I'd have to disagree that it is a landmark. If you look at the area photo, what do you see? You see this large property that really stands out. I understand the Rogers' concern on that, and I fully understand where they're coming from, but this is more than just trying to save land just because. A heritage house should have something that is meaningful also. You look at some of the other examples of heritage properties. A perfect example was 175 Main Street, the Deschanel building, the St. Paul's University. They designated this committee designated the part of the land heritage because of the laneway with trees lining either side all the way down. This property is more than that. Yes, the house doesn't face the street, but back in 1840, it actually faced the only street that went through there, which would have been Maryville, because these are all 100-acre properties. But when you look at it, the first thing you think of is an estate property. House might be turned off a little bit, but you have that beautiful winding way, tree-lined property, and you're going to this majestic house. Which brings me to other points that have been raised earlier about maintenance and taking care of the house. I fully understand that, yes, these houses need to be taken care of. You see lots of heritage properties currently being let go, and then unfortunately need to be demolished. Our house, when we bought it, was in a very similar state. Unfortunately, the previous school that had been rented out from the church had really trashed the interior. We completely restored that house. Not just renovated, but we restored the interior. We restored the original woodwork. We put the work into it. Took out all the lath and plaster, all the lead paint and everything else. So this can be done. It is an initial investment, but it's not hard. And when it comes to maintenance, these houses don't require any more maintenance than your regular house. The windows need caulking. The roof needs to be redone. Items like that. It's standard maintenance. And having a house that looks exactly like that, we know what it takes. Yes, there are some restrictions. Ideally, you want the windows to be as original as possible. The mortar around the stone has to follow specific heritage rules and that. It's really a minor inconvenience, but if the stone has to be repointed anyways, you're going to have to do it. It's part of regular maintenance for any type of house. So, and also my final point is the history really does go beyond the poet, Mr. Campbell. This house is actually the oldest house in this neighborhood. It is representative of the original land allocation. The Scott family, as it was mentioned in the report, immigrated there in 1819. And if you look at the map from 1879, you can see the entire city view is actually owned by the Scott family and their descendants. You see Scott family, you see the Sullivans, which is what Mary Jane, who is the oldest daughter, married into the Sullivan family. They own the entire city view. This is actually a major part of Nepean, major part of history that still stands. We were in communication with the descendant of Archibald Scott. And when we mentioned that, did you know Archibald Scott built another house?
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. Sorry.
Okay, I'm done.
You're done? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And just checking to see if there are any questions. Councillor Moffat.
Your house isn't designated, is it?
No, it's not. When we originally asked about that, when we bought the house, we were told it was on the list, but not designated.
Well, you can apply.
We can, yes. Yeah. Once we finish all the rentals that we've been ongoing for the last 12 years, that is our plan.
Why would you do the rentals before you designate it?
There's certain things, for example, the windows do need to be changed. And under designation, we actually have original windows, and we plan on keeping them there, but we want to make sure that there's no restrictions to make sure that we make the original better.
Because designation causes issues after the fact, right? When you're renovating houses?
It could. Not necessarily all the time, but it could.
Member Quinn.
Just to add to that, the designation would also give you access potentially to some funding.
Yes, we are aware of that. So.
Okay, thank you very much for coming out this morning. So next on our list is Jill Prott. Sorry, Ms. Pro. Good morning and welcome.
Hi. The Rogers House was built in 1840 for the Scott family. In the early 1900s, it became home to William Wilfred Campbell, a renowned Canadian writer and one of the Confederation poets. I'll always remember one of his poems that I studied in school, along the line of smoky hills, the crimson forest stands, and all the day the blue jays call throughout the autumn lands. It's hard to believe that this poet lived around the corner from my house. Under the Ontario Heritage Act, municipalities can pass bylaws to designate properties of cultural heritage, value, or interest. According to the provincial government, designation of heritage properties is a way of publicly acknowledging a property's value to a community. At the same time, designation helps to ensure the conservation of these important places for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. A heritage designation recognizes the importance of the property to the local community. It protects the property's cultural heritage value. It encourages good stewardship and conservation, and it promotes knowledge and understanding about the property. The members of our community are elated that the Kamori House is being considered for heritage designation. This original stone farmhouse is an old and rare building that predates the existing neighborhood. In fact, it predates Confederation, and it represents an important piece of our Canadian history. My family's lived in Cityview since 1980. We've always been intrigued by this unique old stone house and its surrounding property. The gardens and house are mostly hidden from the road by an old stone wall and large evergreens, which have made the property even more intriguing. I've never passed it without looking up the stone-flanked driveway to get a glimpse of the property and the house. It somehow magically transforms you to a different time and a place. It is centrally located in the middle of our community and has always been of interest to us. It's hard to believe that this early homestead was built in 1840. That's over 176 years ago. Ottawa was still named Bytown until 1855. Apparently, it was originally a farmhouse, and crops and animals were raised on the surrounding farmland. I can't even imagine the events that must have taken place in this property. The families who were brought up here, the births and deaths, the hardships and the winters that they would have had to endure. The existence of this homestead helps to preserve our cultural heritage and the memory of those early settlers. It's a unique property and a sharp contrast to the existing housing styles found in our community today. When Wilfred Campbell lived here, it had only 5 acres and he worked on weekends and days off to transform the rough grounds into gardens and landscaping. He knew many important politicians and writers at the time, and I imagine that they probably visited and partied on this property. It is fortunate that today several acres of these gardens have still been preserved around the house. This land frames the house and helps to give it its stately appearance. It is the building and the natural elements that surround it that collectively make it a cultural heritage landscape. The house is visually and historically linked to its surroundings. The entire property reminds us of our heritage and the development of the community. It gives us a sense of place. We've recently learned that the entire property of some 2 acres is up for sale. RE/MAX has listed 21 Withrow Avenue with potential development of some 14 lots, 50 by 100 feet. We believe that the protection of the stone house alone in the middle of a new subdivision of some 12 additional new houses will do little to preserve this unique property for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. The land needs to be included to recognize the agricultural heritage of our area. Designation of the entire property would recognize the importance of the property to local community, and it would encourage good stewardship and conservation. Besides the importance of protecting our heritage, the preservation of this property is vital to our community. This property with stone wall, country lane, gardens, and mature trees has been a landmark in the center of our neighborhood for well over 100 years. The land surrounding the house is an integral part of the property. We understand that surrounding lands are often included when properties are given heritage status to preserve them. In fact, entire districts have heritage status. This property certainly meets the criteria. Early Carlton plans show...
Sorry, Ms. Bro, I'm just going to have to ask you just to wrap up in a few sentences. I'll give you just a little bit more time. But yeah, thanks.
I'd like to say this property is the last opportunity for any open house to be, or any open space to be included in our neighborhood. So it's crucial that this property is preserved. Our community feels that this designation may present a unique opportunity for us to consider purchasing the property for long-term protection and to share it. Hopefully, it can eventually become a public property for the benefit and enjoyment of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I see no questions from committee members, so I want to thank you for coming out this morning.
Okay, thanks.
So next on the speakers list is Gwyneth Davidson from the City View Community Association. And she'll be followed by Linda Hode from Heritage Ottawa. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you. 21 Withrow, also known as Kilmorey, or Rogers House, if you like, be designated as an important heritage landmark. This request refers to the property and home, which was built in the 1840s, as I know you've already heard, and the remaining grounds of approximately 2.2 acres, 2.02 acres, both which predate Confederation. We know that our City View community has been built around this property, and it is a good representation of our history from its earliest beginnings. It has gone from being a very large farm with an original stone house, farmhouse, to a well-known landmark property within our neighborhood. Our community association has been in existence since the 1950s, and we have several references to Kilmorey and its value to our historic community within our archived files. I have given the ladies at the front desk copies of 2 reports which were presented to the old city of Nepean, so I know that the city of Ottawa probably doesn't have these at the moment. The first one was written in November 1977. The Community Association produced this report entitled City View Tomorrow, a report on current community concerns and proposals for their resolution. I have 3 brief quotes I'd like to point out to you on page 14. Item number 6, all City View heritage buildings, Appendix A, should be included in the Heritage Register of the Province of Ontario to ensure their continued existence and appropriate site areas assigned to them in keeping with their character and importance. Ancillary buildings should also be registered. On page 20, Under Heritage Buildings, 4 handsome survivors of City View's royal past stand in the midst of today's suburban community. 3 stone farmhouses built in the mid-1880s and a frame house built later that century are described in the following pages. These memories of Nepean's roots must be suitably protected and preserved for future generations of our community. On page 24 of this document that was written in 1977, the Scott House, 21 Withrow Avenue. This stone house was built around 1852 by Archibald Scott, who, with his brother John, purchased the previously described property on Peter Street. The home was owned briefly by the Canadian poet Wilfred Campbell for the last 3 years before his death on January the 1st, 1918. He gave it the name of Kilmorey, also variously spelled, and there's a different spelling, after the ancestral home in Scotland of his cousin, John Campbell, Duke of Argyll. The stone house is currently owned by Dr. and Mrs. J.D. Roger. 2 small frame houses at 14 and 16 Withrow Avenue were originally farm buildings forming part of the Scott estate. Each of the frame houses and the stone house have old outbuildings associated with them. That was written in 1977. In 1979, a further report, City View Green, a request for additional and improved space and improved park space and local facilities to nurture and aesthetically enhance our community, the community. These, and I have again 3 quick quotes on page 3 of the 1979 report. This report contains the residents' approach to the imaginative but realistic measures required to improve the neighborhood's visual and recreational standards. It is a reflection of the love and pride that they feel for their unique historic community. On page 12 of the 1979 report, the second bullet from the top, historic property, both buildings and land features that permit people in the community to know about and physically explore their heritage. And on page 16 of the 1979 report, Heritage Properties. City View contains a number of homes built before the turn of the century, which should be considered for heritage registration. Recommendations should be made regarding improvement to and protection of their settings. In particular, the city must investigate long-term protection of the heritage home and property at 21 Withrow Avenue. Potential future uses include the establishment of a Nepean archives or a museum, and this last very fine piece of open space in City View should be preserved for passive (botanical) parkland. Should this prove to be a viable option, the City View Community Association will consult with the City View Nepean Horticultural Society to elicit its views on the best future use of this property.
Ms. Davidson, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up because you're past your 5 minutes, please.
Okay. This land, as you know, represents the original settlers. In view of the fact that Merivale is slated, the Merivale area, to double its density in the next, 10 years? That's on the books. This is, we can't afford to lose this historic green space. This is an opportunity for Ottawa to have its own Stanley Park, or as in Vancouver, or Central Park as in New York, right in the heart of modern Ottawa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming out this morning. Any questions from committee members of Ms. Davidson? I don't see any, so thank you again for coming out today.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Okay. So the last speaker on the list is Linda Hode from Heritage Ottawa. Good morning and welcome.
Slippery chairs. Good morning, thank you. Heritage Ottawa is not opposed to development of this property. Our comment in the report was meant to indicate that we wanted sufficient land around the house that it would
it would sort of retain a certain integrity. We're concerned, perhaps because many of us are downtown people, about the inadequate side yards sometimes provided by the zoning bylaws. That may not be the case in this area of the city. It has occurred to me, since those comments were submitted, that through the development process, there will either be a requirement to provide parkland, or there will be a cash in lieu of parkland contribution required, which could be somewhat fairly significant. 60% of the cash in lieu of parkland contribution remains in the area where the infill or intensification is taking place. And surely it would be possible, or should be possible, that to ensure that the selected through cash in, or through the what's it called, the parkland contribution, or the purchased through the cash in lieu of parkland contribution could, in fact, make sure that there is sufficient land around the house to make it, to retain its integrity. So there is some funding or process available, I think, to protect the house while still permitting a reasonable amount of development on the property. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. Any questions? I don't see any, so thank you for coming out this morning. So that, I believe, is the end of the list of public speakers on this item. I just thought I would, there were a few issues that were raised by members of the public that I think it's important just to provide a little bit of clarity on. The first is, it is a valid question to ask whether or not the committee wishes to consider only the house or the associated property as part of the designation. It is not, however, the job of this committee to opine on or approve any potential development plans on that property. And I'm wondering, Ms. Sneddon, could you just maybe briefly speak to the process if there were a desire on the part of a existing or future property owner to develop portions of that property, or Mr. Herwar?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there would, in all likelihood, be, and it would depend on the proposal, but there would certainly be some sort of lot creation required, either through the Committee of Adjustment or possibly a plan of subdivision. The current zoning is it's an R1 zone, large lots consistent with the neighborhood, so there is the possibility that there could be relief from the zoning bylaw required. But at this time, we're speculating. We don't have any proposals before us. In terms of the previous speaker's comment, it was correct. Through the, if there were lot creation, there could be either cash in lieu or a small parkland dedication obtained through that process.
Thank you. The second item of clarification I just wanted to raise is the issue of tree removal. The City of Ottawa does have a tree bylaw which requires any property owner to get a distinctive tree permit for any tree with a circumference of 50 centimeters or greater. So I just thought I would communicate that as a point of information. So with that, I open up the floor for discussion or comments or questions of staff on the report. Councillor McKinney.
I'm not certain if we have the correct staff here to, well, maybe back here at planning, but just on the trees that have been mentioned, of course the tree bylaw does, would be in place here to protect the trees that are on this property. Is that not correct?
That's correct. The mature tree bylaw would, or distinctive tree bylaw, sorry, would apply here.
Right. So any removal of trees would have to be approved through that. Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify, Chair, they would only be triggered if they met the size criteria in the bylaw.
Yeah. Maybe I'll pose a question to staff. I mean, we've had a number of members of the public encourage the committee to consider the property as well as the house that staff has recommended. Could you maybe speak a little bit to the decision-making process that you went and why you are recommending designation of the house and not the entire property?
Sure. The property was considered as part of the decision-making process in recommending this building for designation. The historic value of the property in our opinion, is more related to its history as a farm property. The property has not functioned as a farm in 100 years or more, and does not have the attributes of a farm today. So staff did not feel that the inclusion of this property as a sort of estate property associated with William Wilford Campbell for 3 years merited the inclusion of the property as a contextual, for its contextual value.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members on this? Any comments? Councillor Shirelli, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As some of you know, the former city of Nepean was nearly perfect. Okay. But possibly one of its few imperfections was the way that it handled heritage. So as the oldest surveyed municipality in Eastern Ontario, we have only a small handful of heritage properties protected. Part of that, I know, comes from attitudes in probably the 70s and 80s, where if you had a worthwhile heritage property like this one, but if you also had even a remote chance of getting a strip mall, you wouldn't designate it. And that was sort of Nepean was very much oriented toward economic development at sometimes at the expense of some other things. And so despite being the oldest surveyed municipality dating back to the 1700s, we have probably the fewest remaining heritage properties. And this one is one of the ones that I think should have been protected. We have in the former, Cityview used to be a police village, and this house was the jewel and center of Cityview's architecture and heritage. And then on through the creation of Nepean, or its amalgamation with Nepean, and then up to the new city of Ottawa, it remains one of very few properties still available to protect the heritage of Nepean. Now, Nepean did do some other things, too, to protect heritage. We did spend a lot of money commissioning history books about Nepean to preserve the history, at least the story, but we didn't do a lot to protect the actual buildings. I think I've been involved in probably 75% of the heritage designations in the former city of Nepean. That doesn't mean I've been around that long, but we did House on Piety Way in Fallowfield. We recently did Al's Steakhouse on Robertson Road, protecting the first, for Bell's Corners, guess what, the first bar in Bell's Corners. And we've had a couple of others through Nepean, but not nearly enough for a city that meant so much to so many people and was really the first in the area to be a surveyed municipality. So we aren't going to get many more chances other than this one and maybe one or two others. So I just ask the committee to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Member Small?
I just had a question for you, Councillor. I wondered, are you, by your comments, are you suggesting that maybe you would be in favor of enlarging the designation to include part or all of the lands?
Well, I would, except that I know what the report says and I know the sense of committee here today. But we really need the house designated. You don't get another chance for this. With the not even, it's still off, but one of the speakers who came up earlier in search of something like a heritage house has come up with a sort of a second best to this. But we definitely need the house to be designated. After that, we definitely need the land around it to be treated properly in relation to the house, but I know that's a planning committee issue. And so, yeah.
Okay, Member Quinn.
Thank you. I'd just like to say, to acknowledge the turnout this morning, following on Councillor Chiarelli's comments that the former city of Nepean does not have a lot of heritage left, and clearly to see the turnout in an area of our city that isn't surrounded by heritage, as this committee usually deals with properties that are in far more dense heritage areas of the city. So it is good to see the community interest in this property. As it turns out, I am actually familiar with this property and have walked by it myself on a number of occasions. The first time I came across it, I was stopped in my tracks, stopped in my tracks. Just, what is this doing here? This is just such an anomaly and an incredible property. And of course, I've been drawn back to it over time, just because of its interesting landscape as much as the house itself. The house is so set back and difficult to see that it really isn't about the house alone. It is about the cultural landscape that surrounds it. So it was rather devastating this morning to learn that the very rare dry stone stack wall has been knocked down. And of course, I'm glad to hear, and I am aware of the fact that the trees are protected to a certain degree based on the size. But I would urge that a great care go forward in the future of this property in terms of determining what's going to happen to the land around the house. So I was disappointed to see that at least some of the land had not been included in the designation, as we've seen before. Certainly, I wouldn't expect the entire property to be designated. There are opportunities to do sensitive development in places like this that incorporate landscape and original heritage property or heritage buildings. So I'm not encouraging a full designation, but it would be nice to see something in terms of some land and protection around the building itself. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe just a question of clarification of staff. Is it correct that if council designates as recommended by staff that any subsequent development application would trigger a character heritage impact statement?
Yes, if the designation is approved and put in place by council prior to any development occurring on the property, any future development would involve heritage staff and likely include a cultural heritage impact statement in order to ensure that the impacts of the proposed development are properly considered.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, I think one of the problems we've had with having this era of buildings, of course, are the great fires of the 19th century that destroyed so many of them. Even stone houses were destroyed. My church was built at the same time, 1839, probably just a little earlier, and a lot of those buildings were done by the people who built the Rideau Canal, because we had stonemasons here. The church I had designated heritage in the 90s, and the manse is not yet, but because it's next to it on the same property, it does get looked at, and I've actually been recommending to the people in our church that they should designate it as well. And but when we built the hall, the heritage people did take a look at to see how we made it sort of fit in with the things. So that's one of the things that they do, and they gave some useful comments at the time, and I think that's what will happen in this case as well. And I know certainly Councillor Chiarelli is very cognizant of it, and any planning that comes forward, I think we would all support him in trying to make sure that the view of the house and how it's been incorporated into that is protected. I have an interesting one in the business park that is set well back from the road, the Monk House, which is a beautiful house. I don't think we've ever designated it, but a company decided they wanted to make sure it was protected when they built there. So they built a building next to it, kind of attached to it, but the house still keeps its framework. It's still back in the trees. So it is possible to do development around a building like this that will maintain a lot of its character, and I think that's what we would like to see in the end. So thank you all for coming.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to ask Councillor Moffat to introduce that amendment that I mentioned at the start.
Whereas report DCS 2016-PAI-PGM-0080 recommends the designation of Kilmorey, 21 Withrow Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and whereas the heritage attributes in Document 5 require clarification, be it resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee approve the following technical amendment to the report. 1, that the second bullet in the list of heritage attributes be replaced with limestone masonry construction, rough cut and laid in random courses on the side and rear facades, and dressed and laid in regular courses on the front facade.
So just to clarify, this is just a textual change to the report that staff asked us to initiate. Is that carried? Great. So on the report recommendation that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Planning Committee recommend that Council issue a notice of intention to designate Kilmorey, 21 Withrow Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act according to the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value attached as Document 5 and as amended. Is that recommendation carried? Carried. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to staff, and thank you to all the members of the public for coming out. It's very important, and we appreciate the time that you've taken to speak to us.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank the committee for their action on this.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we're moving now to item 8 on our agenda, which is a proposal to approve the Heritage Register procedures that were attached in the agenda. And I'll just ask staff to briefly explain what the procedure is, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions or comments. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a PowerPoint for this one, so I'll just briefly go through the motivations for the report and what it says. As a result of various demolitions of properties listed on the Heritage Register and the lack of a procedure to address those demolitions, staff have developed a series of procedures related to addition, demolition, and removal of properties from the Heritage Register. The document that we're asking you to approve is attached as Document 1 to the staff report. The procedures for addition include that properties will be added in various ways to the register, including heritage inventories, staff-initiated designations, additions, property owner requests, and through Heritage Conservation District studies. So one of the main ways that properties may be added over the next few years would be through the ongoing citywide heritage initiative that is part of the department's work plan that's going on right now. All additions to the Heritage Register will require the approval of City Council after consultation with this committee, and that's outlined in the Act. The main crux of this report is around the demolition of properties listed on the Heritage Register. So all the Act requires is that the property owner provide the City with 60 days notice in advance of demolition of a property, but it also includes a clause that says that the City can, that the notice shall be accompanied by such plans and shall set out such information as the Council may require. And so we decided that perhaps there was a requirement for additional information beyond just a letter saying we wish to demolish or we are going to demolish our property. I conducted some best practice research across the province, which you'll see some of the precedent research included in Document 2 of the report. We are suggesting that the 60-day notice be accompanied by a form that includes, it's basically like an application form, but it's not an application because it's notice, that outlines the property owner information, the date that it's submitted, the rationale for the demolition, so why they want to demolish it, and that may be as simple as we wish to redevelop the property, but we are asking for that rationale. Any studies that might be required, so if the rationale is that the building is contaminated or something like that, that there may be a request made by staff to provide proof of that information. As well as photo documentation of the building so that it can be placed at the City Archives. The procedure around this in the past has been that once we receive a notice of intention to demolish, staff have been bringing forward a sort of a memo to this committee advising them that there is a demolition notice that has been received. The new proposed procedure would see the receipt of the notice of intention from the property owner along with any required documentation, which the other optional documentation that could be requested by staff would be some historical information about the building, and that would be decided on a case-by-case basis. Staff will issue an acknowledgement letter acknowledging the start of the 60-day notice, and will notify the ward councillor and the chair of this committee that the notice has been received. So Heritage staff will then proceed to evaluate the building and determine whether or not it merits designation under Part 4 of the Act, and if it does, we'll prepare a report to be brought forward to this committee recommending designation of the building within that 60-day time frame. If we determine that the property should not be designated, no report will be brought forward unless requested by the ward councillor or the chair of the Heritage Subcommittee. So that's the main portion of the report. And then the final piece is the removal of properties from the register. So at this point, we have properties that are still listed on the register but are actually no longer in existence because the approval of City Council is required in order to remove a property from the register. So we are proposing that a report will be prepared in the first quarter of each year that will recommend removal of any properties that have been demolished over the course of a year, any staff-initiated removals for any reason, as well as any requests we might have from property owners to remove their property from the register. So it will include recommendations to either remove or to deny removal of a property from the register. And that's about it.
Great, thank you. A question from Councillor Moffat.
Just remember, just jog my memory, when we dealt with 3524 McBean, and it was determined very early on in the 60-day process that it was not going to be protected, it was not worthy of protection by the city, but then the property owner had to wait the entire 60 days before they could actually obtain a demolition permit. Are we attempting to address that anyway, or is that an Act issue that we would not be able to address on our end?
We did, through you, Mr. Chair, we did consider this in crafting this procedure, and exactly that one situation. We are not addressing that in this proposed procedure, and the reason for it is that we were concerned that rather than going through our proposed procedure, which is to provide appropriate information and historical information about the building if requested, and wait out the 60 days, property owners would just apply to have their building removed, and we would just be constantly dealing with requests to remove buildings in order to skirt the requirements of demolition.
Well, no, but that's not the point. The point was that no one skirted anything. Because you had already determined, you had already responded. And the fact is you responded within a few days. So they still had to wait about 55 days after you responded to tear the building down, even though everyone was fine with them tearing the building down.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, you're correct. Unfortunately, the Act requires the 60 days, and there's no, as far as I know, legal may have something more to say about it, but as far as I know, there's no way around that.
All right. Well, that was the.
Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
That's right. That should have been the answer to the first part. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Anything to add to that? So there's a 60-day notice period. It's in the Act. It can't be waived. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. That's a good question. We have the answer. Any other questions or comments? If not, then I guess what we do is we approve. So is that recommendation carried? Carried. Great. That's going to planning and to full council for your information. Okay, so next on our list is we finished with the substantive items. There are no in-camera items. No notices of motion that I'm aware of. Any inquiries? I see none. So under other business, we have, is the technical circulation part of other business? No, that's a separate item, right? Okay. So we have technical circulations that are mentioned. This is part of our new procedure that we discussed last year, that we wanted to be aware of any zoning applications, development applications that could affect designated properties or HCDs under Part 5 of the Act. So I'm just going to ask staff to briefly speak to the three that we've circulated for this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are the three application zoning bylaw amendments are at 135 Barrett Street, 224 Cooper, and 70 Richmond Road. 135 Barrett is as you know, on circulation. The plans have been through UDRP, and we are anticipating revised plans, and the heritage application, which is required if there for the development of the site, has not yet been received, but this will be in front of you as an application under the Ontario Heritage Act. The zoning bylaw amendment for 224 Cooper is to extend a use, so it doesn't affect the exterior of the building whatsoever. And 70 Richmond Road, again, when it will be in front of you as an application under the Heritage Act, but we have yet to receive an application, and the zoning bylaw amendment is proceeding.
Great.
And staff's position on all of these, because they're in the pre-consultation phase, PGM does not yet have a position on any of these applications.
Okay, thank you very much. That is useful. So the last item under other business that I just wanted to raise is at our retreat last year, members decided that it would be useful for the committee to consider some additional, let's call them extracurricular activities, whether they be study tours or seminars, literacy raising on issues of heritage throughout the city of Ottawa. So I just wanted to note that I took that advice under advisement, and I'd like to come back to the committee at our May meeting with a few ideas for discussion and perhaps execution on one or two specific items that we can explore over the coming months. And as part of that, I'm going to be meeting with the Board of Heritage Ottawa at their meeting on April 26th, and I will also be seeking the board's input into that as well. So I'll be reporting back at the May meeting, and can certainly invite committee members, if you have specific ideas or thoughts on that, feel free to call me or send me an email, and as I say, I'll come back to our May meeting with a proposal or two for discussion and agreement. So that's it. We are adjourned, and we are meeting next on Thursday, the 12th of May. So thank you very much, and have a great day.